Pastor Shawn Ellis is the Director of Communication and Media at the Ontario Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Church in Canada. Before entering the ministry, Pastor Ellis was the head of a consulting firm specializing in environmental toxicology. He conducted indoor air quality assessments for all types of facilities on behalf of corporate and residential clients. However, his journey took a divine turn when God called him to give up the corporate world and serve Jesus in ministry. Amen. Pastor Ellis then transitioned from the world of science to the science of soul winning. I love that. Amen. Dynamic preacher, Pastor Ellis has preached internationally, impacting people in Canada, Europe, the United States, and the Caribbean. He merges technology and theology to produce multimedia sermons to tell the world that salvation can be found in no one else but Jesus. Pastor Ellis also produces a delightful children's program, Connect to Christ, that's the name of it, which teaches biblical principles in a fun way that impacts both young and old. He also co-authors with his wife, Leanne, a monthly youth advice column for teens called No Cap in the Canadian Adventist Messenger magazine. Pastor Ellis is currently pursuing a doctorate of mass media at Andrews University. So I see Pastor Ellis here. He looked like he is ready to go, and we are excited to have you here, and we are eager to hear what the Lord has impressed for you to share with us today.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation and the introduction. It is always my pleasure to be able to share whatever God has allowed me to learn. And as I'm getting ready, I'm going to just share my screen as well, because I will have a PowerPoint going. And I want to say before, as I always like to say, is that, even though I'm going to be bringing, sharing knowledge from my previous life, if you will, in terms of the toxicology work that I did, the indoor air quality work, I want to let you know too, when God puts a call on your heart, don't resist. He will take you places. I used to be one of 10 certified indoor air quality consultants in Canada, hard certification to get, and then also one of 2 in Canada in terms of mold remediation. And my company was flourishing, but God called me and I said, you never turn your back on God. And even though I loved what I did, I have so much more joy in what I'm doing now. So God always puts a call on our heart. So I'm just encouraging you, as you hear this, as you're taking notes, think about what God has called you to and how you can answer. All right, so that's enough of my preaching. We're going to go into the session right now. So the topic that we're going to talk about specifically is breathe easy, indoor air quality, and your health and your home. Now, indoor air quality has become relatively a more important thing in these recent years, but we've really missed out on its impacts on our well-being and health. We're only starting to grapple, to understand, to really have a clearer picture of the impact on that on our health. And I always like to say this one: when did indoor air quality, or IAQ, become important? Well, we are going to have some interactivity, and so I am going to ask my hosts to maybe sometimes relay some of the answers in the chat. But, for this one, you might find it interesting that it goes back as far as Ellen G. White. In the Ministry of Healing, she says, in the building of houses, it is especially important to secure thorough ventilation and plenty of sunlight. Let there be a current of air and an abundance of light in every room in the house. Sleeping rooms should be so arranged as to have a free circulation of air day and night. God impressed upon her not only a health message related to food and to our exercise health, but even the buildings in which we lived. God understood that coming very soon, there was going to be a problem when it came to indoor air quality, and brought this message to her to share it with us. And I will tell you that this IAQ was even more important or became more important not only in Ellen White's time, but as far back as in the Bible. And I'll show that a little bit later on. So what will we cover today? Well, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to look at the brief history of the development of indoor air quality issues. How did they actually become such an important factor? And then we'll look at some 3 cases of work that I had done in the past, name changed and situations changed to protect the identities of the individuals, but there were actual cases where there were specific health impacts to give you a flavor of how indoor air quality can affect your health. And then we'll summarize and give some time for some questions. So the first is, let's take a brief look at the history of indoor air quality. Now, indoor air quality in modern times can really be defined as pre-1970s or a post-1970s problem. Now, I'm going to ask you now, and you could put in the chat as I'm talking, what was happening in the 70s that this became a thing? And I'm going to just explain a little bit more. Then we're going to ask the host to maybe share some of the answers that might have been posted in the chat as I'm going along. So it's pre-1970s. Pre-1970s, almost all of the houses that were built, housing stock that was built, had a certain type of air circulation. In the indoor air quality world, we measure what's called air exchanges per hour. How much does the air go through a house or a building in an hour? Pre-1970s, the air exchange in a house would have been 1, meaning that in 1 hour, the air in your house would have been totally changed by the outdoor air. So you're really getting a nice flow of whatever's outside is now inside. If you had some stuffiness inside, then that's okay. In about an hour's time, it's all taken care of. But then after the 1970s, that air exchange changed. It changed to 0.3. 0.3 means that it now takes 3 hours for the air in your house to be fully exchanged by outside air. So it goes from 1 to 0.3. Now you can imagine, that means if you burn something in your house pre-1970s, it would have aired out pretty quick. Now, if you burn something in your house post-1970s, that smell lingers for quite a while. Now, before I go on, I want to ask, what do you think was happening in the 1970s? You can check your history notes. You might even be so bold to go on Google. What was happening in the United States around that time that would have caused such a change in the indoor air quality? And if there's anyone in the chat there, if you want to share that with me, because I have my screen all set out, or if you want to even answer, feel free. I'll give you an opportunity. Okay, someone was saying the air conditioner. Okay, yeah, air conditioning, I'm seeing that there. Well, I'm going to give you the answer. A lot of you are saying air conditioning, closing windows. The actual answer is the oil crisis. The oil crisis. It became very expensive for energy. So if you had an air conditioner, the cheap cost of electricity at that time all of a sudden went up. And so you now wanted to save as much energy as possible. So you might remember, some of you, how they would have the plastic you could put over your windows so you didn't have air drafts coming in. We start to make better insulated walls and things of that nature. And that actually, while it saved energy, it created a bigger problem of keeping a lot of indoor pollutants inside and affecting our health. So if we want to try to summarize this brief history, before 1970s, It was sort of like this guy with a bag on his head. Very easy to breathe. It might not have been the best looking thing, but it was very easy to breathe. What the air is around you was what you were breathing in. Post 1970s, it was more like this. We were trying to do everything that we could to try to keep our energy inside our house, the heat or the cool inside our house, but we unwittingly start to build up a lot of indoor contaminants. Now, when you take a look at any type of building, and I say what is inside our home is inside of us, all these chemicals here, if I took an air quality test in any of your homes, in any of your churches, in any of your buildings, I will find a majority of these things here. And you might be kind of shocked because for those of you that have some medical knowledge, you'd be saying some of these are potentially cancer-causing agents. And a lot of these chemicals come from things that you would be very surprised of. If I show you on the next screen here, so you have glues or adhesives, have toluene, ethylbenzene, formaldehyde. Yes, you'll still find formaldehyde in some types of glues. I'll tell you a quick story. There used to be a certain furniture purveyor that was well known for furniture that was pre-packed and you had to put it together. And I will not mention their name, but they were known as having the company's name Effect. And that was because when people would put it together, the chemicals from it would cause people to actually feel unwell. That company has since changed its ways, so you won't find as much of some of those chemicals. But even in our cleaning products, some of that nice lemony fresh smell is in fact a chemical that for some people causes reactions. You'll find it in wall coverings, meaning wallpaper, different types of textiles, and even in furniture. It's an amazing thing of how, when you go into an environment, you can really have waves of different chemicals washing over you, being breathed inside by you, and can in some cases have an effect on you. Now, you might be asking, well, if some of these are cancer causing, is indoor air quality causing cancer? Now, one of the challenges is that the concentrations in which you find these substances are still relatively low, unless you're in a very unusual situation, and I'll show you one. But because they're so unusually low, it's hard for science at this point in time to connect these small amounts and different amounts. It gets very complicated when you have a lot of different chemicals being exposed onto a person. Normally, science likes to look at one chemical at a time. So to have all of these in your environment, it's a very difficult science to be able to say with any degree of certainty that yes, it is cancer causing at these levels that we would commonly experience. And in fact, the science of analyzing all of these things is so complex and time consuming that they normally bound all of these together when you do an air quality test and call them, these chemicals are called volatile organic compounds. Not that they will explode, but that they are easily get into the air. They normally bound them all together in what's called a total VOC assessment. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that again. And I want to take you to one of the first cases. This is the case that I call I Got It Covered. So what happened was it was a situation in an apartment building. It was a husband and wife, late 60s, so in their senior years. They were generally in good health. They were living in an older apartment, but something changed. They found that they were unable to sleep. They had reoccurring headaches. They went to their doctor. Doctor checked them out, looking to see if there was any medical issue, and they couldn't find anything. So nothing medical, but they were definitely, both of them were having problems sleeping and reoccurring headaches. So what was going on? This is the way these cases would come to me back in those days, and that I'd have to go through a process to try to figure out what was happening. So what we did is there was a number of ways you can assess a building. I won't get into the technical, but give you the big picture. We found that in this particular unit, there was very little air movement. So they were living in an apartment, very little air movement. At the time, the ambient temperature is about 25 degrees Celsius. Yes, I am Canadian, so we measure in Celsius. I think that's about 77 degrees Fahrenheit, thereabout. So it was warm. It was warm, and it was the summertime. And when we did a test of the chemicals in the air, the total VOCs of those different chemicals, we found the levels to be very high. So when we did all the assessments, we realized that the source of the problem of their symptoms was likely what was called off-gassing and pressurization, right? So now what is off-gassing? What does that mean? That's a term. That's basically when chemicals are emitted from a newly produced material. We've all experienced off-gassing. If you've bought a new car, and some of us love that new car smell. Well, what you're actually loving is the off-gassing coming off of all the new products. And it's not necessarily a good thing. I actually had a client that would actually have an allergic reaction to new cars, had to find a way to deal with that. But that's what's coming off. The other place that you will experience off-gassing is you might be walking down the supermarket. You go in one aisle or another, and you can always tell. If I blindfolded you, you could always tell when you are in the cleaning aisle, because all of a sudden you can smell a little bit of all those cleaners, even though they're wrapped up tight. They're still being able to off-gas and emit their odor into the air. So that is what off-gassing is. And in this apartment, the off-gassing was coming from a couch. The family had bought a new couch, and they had the original plastic. In their culture, they wanted to keep the plastic over it to keep it in good condition at all times. So you had a brand new fabric that was releasing off-gassing. You had the plastic that was also off-gassing, little air movement. And so all of those chemicals were staying in the air, and quite possibly because of their elder status and that they were in the unit a fair bit, those chemicals were affecting them. Now, off-gassing was one of two problems. The other problem in this particular situation is something that was related to pressurization. All buildings, whether it's a house, whether it's a high-rise, have two different types of pressurizations, and they're designed that way. One is a natural design. It's called the stack effect. Think of a chimney stack. So air will naturally move upward in any building to the highest area. So if you have, for example, if you don't have your air conditioning on, you know in your basement it's the coolest and the top floor is the highest because hot air naturally rises. And that happens in this building too. So there was a natural flow of air moving up in this apartment. But apartment buildings are designed to try to not have that have such a big effect, because you can imagine if you're living on the penthouse, you'd be baking in the middle of the summer. So what buildings like these do is they have another form of pressurization called mechanical pressurization. That's where the building's heating and ventilation system push air. Typically, they push it from the elevators into the units. That way, the smells of the units don't come out into hallways. If you've ever walked down an apartment hallway and you can smell what was happening in all of the different units, then most likely the pressurization wasn't working very well. And that's allowing the air to come into the hallway. Normally, it's designed to be pushed. And there's a little saying in the indoor air quality world that if your building doesn't blow, it sucks. And what it means by that is the pressure inside the building of any high rise is supposed to be always pushing out air. So pushing it out or pushing it into the units. If it's not doing that, then it's sucking things, which could be also sucking things you don't want in the air quality. So in this person's unit, their problem was he had off-gassing and the pressurization wasn't good because there was really no air movement. So it was just staying there. Imagine like a cloud of smog staying in their unit, affecting their health. So what's the solution to that? Well, in this case, it was relatively straightforward. The first was I told them you have to get rid of the plastic covering. You know, let that couch and get rid of the plastic that's off-gassing and let the couch itself off-gas. And take advantage of the fact that the unit was already kind of warm to accelerate the off-gassing. If you have a new product in your house and it's really giving off a strong odor, if it's in the heated, let's say you have a hot room in your house, let it be in that hot room, you'll find that the gases come off quite quickly. And I said to get rid of that gas, then we added some exhaust. We actually put some fans, inexpensive fans, in their windows that was sucking the air out. And they did that for about a week. They didn't use an air conditioner. They didn't have the money for an air conditioner. In this case, it was actually referred to me by a doctor. And so we just let the fans continue to suck it out. And in about a week or so, their health issues were resolved. They were able to sleep. They had no reoccurring headaches. So that's a good example of how off-gassing, these chemicals that we can find naturally occurring, I guess they're not really natural, but we bring them into our environments, can reach a level that it can have a health impact. Now, it's not just chemicals that can affect us. There can be other factors as well. And that's where I want to share with you case number 2, the one I call it's all relative. Now, in this situation, it was another house, a mother in their early 40s. And this was a relatively new home. So it was less than 30 years. And just get this going here. And her issue was that she was having reoccurring respiratory problems in the winter, always having colds, always having coughs. And it was only her that was affected. Doctor checked her out, said, your health is good. You know, we don't see anything in your blood work. We're not sure what's going on. And so the doctor said, look, there's no medical basis for this. And this is going to be a common theme that you see in a lot of indoor air quality problems. Often it's one or a small group out of many people that are affected. And, you know, they're struggling and everybody else is looking at them saying, well, I don't know, I'm fine, maybe it's you. And so they called us in to do an assessment of this home. And so it was a question, so what's going on? So what we did is we did the chemical test, the total VOC test. Well, everything was fine there. We looked at potentially, you know, there's certain types of biological things like mold that could cause respiratory problems, but that was fine there too. But what we did find that the relative humidity was less than 30%. And that can actually have an impact on your health. Now, what is relative humidity? And how can low relative humidity affect your health? Well, in technical terms, it's a ratio. It's how much water is in the air at a given temperature. The higher the temperature, the more water can be held in the air. Think about the Caribbean. You know, we've all had some wonderful, I hope we've all had some wonderful opportunities to be somewhere in the Southern Caribbean or in some tropical area where you can feel the humidity in the air. The warmer the air, the more moisture it is. And so I want to show you this in a practical sense. So in this person's house, it was, again, kind of winter. -1 would be close to freezing. So whatever that is in Fahrenheit. So outside, the humidity is 68%. 68%. That's a lot of moisture outside. In her house, it's nice and comfortable. That's 22 degrees Celsius, which is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Nice and comfortable. But then when that moisture outside goes into the house, then because the house and all the building materials is warmer, it starts to absorb, if you will, the humidity. And so the actual humidity in the air can be as low as 13%. Now, when your air is very dry, it's going to dry out the mucous membranes in your nose, in your airways, even in your eyes. You might feel itchy eyes. And in her case, her system was more sensitive than the rest of the family, and she was coughing. And after a while, it actually can allow respiratory problems to develop. You're more likely to get flus and viruses. And with continued coughing and dry air, it almost, I like to describe it like a sandpaper in your airways. It can just get worse and worse, and you just continue to have problems. So that was actually what was going on in her house. And she had no idea that the humidity was that low. So what's the solution? Again, in this case, it was relatively straightforward. Purchase a humidity meter. You can find these everywhere, your hardware store, online, everywhere. And all it will tell you is how much the humidity is in your house. Your ideal range of humidity is you want it above 30% and below 50%. Every building is different. And I always say, if you find, let's say in the wintertime, this is where it really becomes a concern, is if you find that you're trying to lift the humidity in your house and your windows start to sweat, then you've raised it too high. Every building is slightly different. So you kind of want it in a little bit of a sweet spot, somewhere above 30 and below 50. And then I recommended that she get a portable humidifier. Now, there's a couple of ways you could have done it. It could have been a whole house humidifier, but in their case, the portable humidifier in the woman's bedroom allowed her to be able to sleep comfortably. So she's not coughing at night. She's getting rest. She's able to build up her immune system because she's getting proper rest. And that addressed the problem. So that's another example. The final case that I'm going to give you, and I'm really just trying to give you an overview of the different kinds of things that can impact our health when it comes to indoor air quality. We've talked about chemical, we've talked about the physical, which is relative humidity, and now we're going to look at case number 3, the one I like to call a growing problem. So I got a call from an individual, and this person said, I am having all kinds of weird health problems in this house. Nobody else is having it. It's just me. And I need you to come over and I need you to test. No problem. I went over to the house and I was greeted at the door by this. And I kid you not, the person was wearing a chemical filter mask. Now, what would you think if you saw a person with a chemical filter mask saying, hi, come on in? You know, you'll probably have a few thoughts running through your mind, and I had those same things as well. But one of the things I had learned in my years is you never discount a person's reaction when it comes to indoor air quality, because it is very, very specific to an individual. There's no one diagnosis. It's very different for individuals. So I went into the house, and the situation was, it was a work at home dad. So he was there all the time. It was an older house, over greater than 50 years. And his symptoms were ill-defined. Sometimes my stomach, my digestive system's not working well. Sometimes I feel great fatigue. Sometimes I just have, some headaches and I'm not able to focus. It was nothing that you could say it was one thing or another. And again, only he was affected. He went to the doctor and there was no medical basis for any of his symptoms. They couldn't find anything. And here's where this particular story becomes a little personal for me. He told me that because of these symptoms, and they've been going on for a few years, they just moved into this house, a beautiful house in a well-to-do neighborhood. When you look at everything, it was well finished. He said his family was basically starting to say, you know what, Dad, maybe you're the problem. Maybe you're lazy. Maybe it's all in your head. And he was at a place where if I wasn't able to find anything, he didn't know what he was going to do. It was very emotional for him. And when you have these indoor air quality problems, you'll see that they really have a direct impact on people and families. So what's going on? Well, we did the chemical test. We found nothing. We did some other physical tests. We found nothing. We did a few other assessments. And one of the ones that we did is we decided to do a mold test, an air test for mold. Now, we're gonna talk a little bit about mold later on, but I want to let you know all buildings have mold. Some people, and I've heard this many times, they say, "Oh, you got mold in your building." We all got mold in our building. If I come into any house, I will find mold in the building. It naturally occurs outside, so it'll be inside. So when I do an air test for mold, what I'm looking at is a comparison to outside levels. If it's similar in the same range of outside, that's normal. If it's way higher, we have a problem. Now, this is a little fuzzy, but it'll give you a rough idea. So on the far left, you can see the outside for this one particular one that I'm going to focus on, Aspergillus penicillium types of mold. It was about 213 at this time of day. In one of the rooms, it was 480. Okay, that might be a little flag, but maybe not. In the other room, it was 5,200. And in the fourth room, it was 1,133. So now I'm thinking, okay, there's definitely a mold issue going on here, but this house looks great. So I asked permission if we can go behind the scenes of some of the materials in their house. And they said, yeah, you go ahead. You do whatever you got to do because I got to figure out what's going on. This is either real or it's in my head. I'm at my wit's end. When we started to take apart his house, we found things. So this is underneath the sink. So this is the kick plate, what you would call, underneath the sink. When we pulled off the finish, you'll see that there's like a haze in the back, and that is all mold growing there. And on the drywall in the back, that's mold there too. We pulled off one of the baseboards around the fireplace. It had mold underneath there as well. So what's going on? There was mold on one of the framing and even on the outer wall. And surprisingly enough, we found it in the furnace room. So when we took out some of the boxes, the furnace room, remember, is providing the air movement for the whole house. That's right next to a set of mold. Well, what was going on? Well, in this case, he bought the house. And when they bought the house, the previous owners, not maliciously, they said, let's fix up the house so it looks good. So they just built over everything, built over the mold, painted over this, painted over that. But the mold was there, and that's what was affecting this individual.
So, Pastor Ellis, I just want to take a second and jump in here because we are running out of time. And this is so much information, and it's such great and important information. But we just want to give, the audience about a couple of minutes, maybe a minute or two, if they had any questions, to place them in the chat, because we have to wrap up by in about 4 minutes. So
yeah, no problem. I'm almost done in 4 minutes. So if you want to keep putting the questions in the chat, then that's fine by me, because then we'll be able to wrap up by then.
Okay. So can you wrap it up in like 2 minutes?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm almost there. So what was the solution in their case? In their case, I had to remove all of the drywall, all of the insulation. We had to use a special technique to remove all of that mold. It basically got the whole building down. And so that's what we ended up having to do for that building. And after we did that, the individual was fine. And his family actually had a reunion because they had thought for so many years that he was the cause of the problem. So if I can leave something with you, when it comes to indoor air quality, you have to mind your P's and Q's, what your property and your indoor air quality. It's really important that you know the systems in your house, whether it's air conditioning, furnace, actually see it and inspect it for yourself. Create an indoor air quality plan. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be just simply remind yourself to change your filters every 3 to 4 months. If you have a flood, which can cause mold, in general, if you get to the flood and able to dry everything out within 48 hours, then you will avoid a mold problem. And also plan your renovations carefully. So many people do a lot of renovations during the winter. That's not the best for indoor air quality because that's when you're keeping your doors closed to keep the heat in. So try to plan that for the summer. And finally, really be mindful about that indoor air quality is a critical part of your overall health. So I want to thank you for your attention.